Mr. Begley, members of the board, we have several items for board discussion this evening. Our first item is a book study, Solve Employee Problems Before They Start. Before I turn it over to Mr. Begley, we are looking at chapters 4 through 6, pages 91 through 143. And I know you guys don't usually need the prompts, but, you know, I read, I noticed, I wondered.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'm very much enjoying this book. I'll lead us out with at least a first thought here, and that was, as I've read this book, I've wondered what is this verbal G and what is ER, and so they finally address that in chapter 4. And it's some sort of analogy tying it to Chinese martial arts and discipline styles and those sort of things, but ultimately, the point he's making is he has read books in the past. I think he references the 7 skills of communication, 9 steps of conflict resolution. And he makes a great point that in the moment of communication, especially conflict communication, it gets emotional in a hurry. You don't have time to go through a 9-step checklist of how you're going to communicate. So it's fast, it's quick, it's down, it's dirty, and as he says over and over, emotions can get the best of either party in that situation. And so he starts to talk quickly about listening. And what's interesting is, in at least 2 of the other books we've read by, and I'll never pronounce her, Brene
Brown.
Yes.
Brene Brown.
Yeah,
Brene Brown. In her book, and then in the last book we just read, listening comes up time and time again, and how important it is. And we all learn it in kindergarten, right? We need to listen, and yet, as adults, it's still a struggle for us, right? I don't know why I'm looking at you, I'm sorry. Fair point. I'll stop there.
I enjoyed the book. And I think just kind of learning more about emphatic listening, not just listening, but, emphatic listening. I think that's really, really important. Some of the narratives that he goes through when he talks about retreaters, that was really, really interesting. And, I've thought about Aunt Bee in, what was the show?
Andy Griffin.
Yes. I guess I've never thought of her in such a negative way until after reading this book, as he categorized her as a retreater. And when when you think back on it, yeah, she sort of did. Instead of confronting and saying or being honest about how she felt, she would basically placate and then really go behind the person's back and just sabotage them more, really kind of scour them. But he talks about how detrimental that really is. And I think in the desire to be nice, sometimes we miss that. And that is something that he delves into. And I think that is a lesson for a lot of people. I think that's a lesson for me because I never want to hurt anyone's feelings. But sometimes, it's better to just be honest. In the situation where he talked about one particular company that was facing the lawsuit because they had an employee who was not getting it, and was not effective in her job, but because they didn't tell her the truth, the employee thought it was something else. She thought it was some type of discrimination based on her protected class status. And so that was just one good, firm, just example of how being honest with someone really can be better than just trying to make them feel good. Just being nice and trying to make them feel good. Retreating essentially is not, that's not empathetic. That is not in the best interest of the employee or person. And so just learning that, it's really been pretty good and pretty helpful.
I think that in the retreater, it talks about like going around and basically talking about people behind their backs and stuff. And I feel like there's a very important distinction in there between the good communications he talked about, which is soundboarding, finding somebody unbiased to discuss with, but in a positive manner, in a truthful decision, versus the retreating method, which is in a negative connotation. And it really made me reflect a lot in that, and I can't remember where it was at exactly, but it talked about a lot like how when you approach a person, you have a lot of negative experience prior to that, you then approach every experience with them negatively in a not biased opinion, or a very biased opinion. And I really reflected on that, and, you know, like, I definitely saw in the past, I've done that a few times, and I've, since reading this book, honestly, I've been trying to be much better about being unbiased towards people that I felt that I had issues with in the past, and it's really been eye-opening, truthfully.
Good. Anyone else want to speak to their experience so far in the book?
I'll just share one piece. It was on 127, and, you know, often I talk about the importance of all of us having a sounding board. You know, that we all have to have someone, sometimes just to vent to. And it talks about on 127, sounding boards are people who will tell you the truth when you go to them for advice and whose opinion you trust. Good sounding boards will also tell you whether they think you are right or out of line and give you input into how they think you should approach a situation. And, you know, some people are hesitant to give you that feedback, and it's important. A couple takeaways, great reminders, you know, just even, you know, this week working through a situation, you know, I said, hey, this is what I'm thinking, but don't just tell me you agree with it because, you know, you don't want to tell me you have a better idea. I want to hear the other side, other opinions, but you have to create that culture where they know that it's safe to share and that it's not personal, and that and just because someone you share some guidance or some alternative pathway and it's not chosen, that's okay too, you know. But it's just important to have different opinions. But again, you know, everyone has to know it's okay to do that before it can happen. So I really enjoyed that part.
I had another thought, and it really goes to a little bit about what Ms. Birding was saying, and this is a great book from a professional standpoint, but certainly from a personal standpoint as well. And he's quoting another author who mentions that, in his opinion, relationships die by ice rather than fire. And that really stuck with me, right? You know, you may have a conflict, and that's the fire, but the failure to resolve it, the failure to address it again, that's the ice that kills a lot of relationships, and that certainly extends to personal relationships.
Sure. Yep, on page 138, under emphatic listening skills, it says, emphatic listening requires the receiver to also listen from the sender's point of view. So I think that's really, really powerful. So if we were all able to do that, you know, in this particular case, he looks at a 20-year-old versus a 50-year-old, with those two coming from two totally different perspectives. And so if you think about it in so many other terms, and where we have differences, just trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes before you have that important conversation, that's a very good thing to do. And that's been a theme in so many of the other
Yes,
books.
that's right.
It really has. And so that's a critical point that's weaved throughout this whole entire book. And I think it's just a really good trend to pick up on.
That really relates to one of my favorite sayings so far in this book, which was on 94, which is words have so many meaning that they don't have any meaning. And it talks about how each word has so many different variations of it. The word pound could be the British money exchange, or it could be I pound somebody because I don't like them, or it could be weight, and there's so many meetings, and so it's really important that you understand people's context and like how they're going to interpret that based off of your sentence for that word to have the meaning you mean and to attend. And so I think that's very important. Back to the other situation, like thinking about the two situations, the very different backgrounds, they would interpret that in different cultures and.
Absolutely. Anything else before we move on? I think we all agree it's an enjoyable read. Yeah, great, all right. I'm sorry.
Next discussion, next and last, will be Thursday, April 13th. Thursday, April 13th, chapters 7 through 9, pages 145 through 187.
Perfect, thank you.
Ready to move on?
Yes.
All right. Our next item for board discussion is in regard to some electric and natural gas supplier agreements. At this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Members of the board, tonight I'd like to talk with you about the district's electric and natural gas supplier agreements. At this time, we do have current agreements in place. This is a similar, if not the same process as what you may face at home. But our electrical contract is up this year, in a couple of months actually, and our natural gas contract is up next year. But right now, we are seeing unusually low natural gas prices and would like to take advantage of that. I have been working with two different brokers over the past few months, monitoring and advising. And in my mind, the reason why I work with two is to kind of compare what each one's saying, just in case one's way outside. But they are consistent with their evaluation on what we're seeing. And right now, with the extremely low natural gas prices, especially from what we've seen over the past 2.5 years, and the electric pricing, which I've only received one, I hope to have another bid price to me by Tuesday, is looking promising. So I just wanted to highlight that I hope to have multi-year contracts in place for approval for our next meeting. So hopefully that will all take place. And again, highlighting the electric is coming up to where we need to get into a contract before that expires. But the natural gas is the one that acting, I believe, wisely, if we can get the pricing that we're talking about right now, getting that secured for multi-years, I think would be an excellent thing for the district. So just kind of want to highlight that because it's one of those things, this changes on a daily basis. We can secure when we work through our process for a couple of days max, but it is very volatile. So I wanted to put that out there so that if I am able to get it secured for the next board meeting, it is something that I believe we should act on.
Are we in agreement there? I think so, with finances and the situation, let's not
We had
a
Yeah.
gamble.
a solid number to work from.
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate it.